Team Ocean3. They will talk about future guidelines of floating nuclear power plants. Please welcome Team Ocean3.
Nuclear power has always been a dilemma for humankind. Too cheap and efficient to give up, but at the same time, too dangerous to fully rely on. Today in this presentation, we're going to talk about what floating nuclear power plants are, their flaws, why it has to be specifically the IMO to act upon them, and ultimately what we want to do about them. So, what are floating nuclear power plants? The concept itself is very simple. Floating nuclear power plants are platforms floating on water in the sea with nuclear power plants on top of them. Now, they can take the form of a ship or a platform, and they're usually deployed in internal waters or docked in harbors. So the question is, why are they used, right? Their biggest strength, the FNPP's biggest strength, is mobility. They can move places. Also, FNPPs are much more cheap or economical to build compared to landlocked conventional power plants. But most importantly, FNPPs shift the dangers of using nuclear power away from humans, because you see historically, catastrophes like Chernobyl or Fukushima have showed us just how dangerous using nuclear power can be. And ever since then, we've been searching for ways to harness that nuclear power while still managing that risk, right? So the concept itself was first conceived in the 1960s in the US, but it wasn't really used because it lacked efficiency. But now, nearly 50 years later, FNPPs are making a major comeback, because this year, Russia has already deployed its first and the world's first in a very long time FNPP in the Arctic Sea. And also China has already announced to deploy at least 20 FNPPs in the South China Sea. So let's talk about Russia, because the academic Lomonosov, Russia's and the world's only currently working FNPP, is currently in the Arctic Sea. Now, there's a lot of information on the slide, but what you need to know is that environmental entities such as Greenpeace are condemning the academic Lomonosov for being a Chernobyl on ice, because it's stationed just kilometers away of Russia's second biggest city. Now let's talk about China, because China's FNPP plan highlights how FNPPs can be used as a political problem, because China has announced to send at least 20 FNPPs to the South China Sea, which is a diplomatic hotspot in which at least 6 countries say that the waters are theirs. So as you can see, despite their merits, FNPPs have a lot of problems ranging from the environment all the way to the political sphere. But today, we're going to focus on the most important and urgent problem in the environment. You see, like I said, FNPPs float on water. Also, FNPPs contain nuclear waste and nuclear fuel. That means in a leakage or an explosion, the results are going to be catastrophic, right? Because it's not a really big problem when we talk about landlocked nuclear power plants, but when you think about oceanic currents, the issue changes from a domestic crisis into a fully fledged transportal crisis. Also, dumping is also a big problem, because Russia and other countries have been known to dump nuclear waste in the seas, and coincidentally, Russia is also our world's first and biggest FNPP user. We know that nuclear waste takes thousands of years to decompose, affecting the life beings that live in those areas. So the question that we want to ask is, do we really want that in the ocean? Do we really want that happening to our children or the next generations, right? So the reason why FNPPs are so susceptible to the problems that we are talking about lies in their deployment and their design. Because FNPPs, like I said, float on water. That means that they are much more susceptible to environmental disasters like tsunamis or underwater earthquakes. Also, FNPPs currently don't have a standard of building, which means that they don't have the thick concrete walls that conventional landlocked nuclear power plants have to contain those problems. So we now know what FNPPs are. We now know their problems. So the question is, why is it specifically the IMO's responsibility to respond to these problems? Now, this will be answered by our next presenter. Gun, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As the second presenter of the Oceans3, I will explain why IMO has to take a role in regulating floating nuclear power plants. First, I would like to talk about the IMO's 2018 till 2023 strategic directions. IMO aims to integrate new and advancing technologies in the regulatory framework. But currently, the FNPPs are in a legal vacuum. The pre-existing nuclear power-related conventions or treaties cannot be applied to them because the concept of a FNPP is unfamiliar. The 1994 Convention on Nuclear Safety, signed by the IAEA, has a very tight regulation system, but it only covers any land-based civil nuclear power plants. The 1948 Convention on IMO specifies the purpose of this organization. IMO is to encourage and facilitate maritime safety, and also to encourage prevention and control of marine pollution from ships. So we looked up the definition of ship, and according to the IMO MEPC 207-62, a vessel of any type whatsoever operating in the aquatic environment is defined as a ship. Thus, according to this definition, a FNPP could be called a ship, and the IMO has to prevent possible pollutions that could happen from this. If we consider the purpose of IMO, and its 2018 till 2023 SD2, it is reasonable for IMO to take a part in the regulatory process of FNPPs. In addition, since IMO has the largest number of member states compared to other related organizations like the IAEA, but also has the largest number of ocean bordering countries as its members, it is not only reasonable, but also efficient for IMO to take control of this issue. Some people might argue that IMO taking control in this issue is invasive. This is because of the FNPPs are placed within territorial waters, where countries have their own sovereignty. However, the UNCLOS, which stands for United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 27 demands nuclear power ships and ships carrying nuclear to carry documents and observe special precautionary measures established for such ships by international agreements. According to the report published by the UN called The Relationship Between the UNCLOS and IMO Conventions, we can learn that the international agreement mentioned in UNCLOS Article 23 refers to the International Convention on Safety of Life at Sea, the SOLAS, and SOLAS Chapter 8, which is titled Nuclear Ships. According to SOLAS Chapter 8, Regulation 6, it mentions the importance of inspection related to radiation safety. It specifically says, start quote, "The administration shall take measures to ensure that there are no unreasonable radiation or other nuclear hazards at sea or in port to the crew, passengers, public, or to the waterways, food, or water resources." Since it says in port and to the public, waterways, food, or water resources, we believe it could be a case interpreted as IMO having the right to intervene in domestic issues, especially when it comes to nuclear-related matters. So, concerning the possible catastrophic impact of an FNPP accident on many adjacent nations' territories and international waters, understanding the purpose of IMO, considering its 2018 till 2023 strategic directions, and realizing how the IMO, IAEA, and even the UN considers issues related to nuclear safety in a very serious manner, we strongly believe IMO has the legitimacy to intervene in matters related to the FNPPs. Then, what should IMO do? Jung-Yoon Kim, the next presenter, will talk about the specific measures IMO should adopt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So having explained why this is a problem and why IMO has jurisdiction and responsibility over this issue, I'll be introducing a two-part solution for the problems. The first part of the solution will be composed of amending the INF code, an existing code adopted by the IMO. The second part of the solution will be establishing a convention, CONEG, or the Convention for Offshore Nuclear Energy Generation. We propose amending the INF code for the FNPPs. The INF code, the International Code for the Safe Carriage of Packaged Irradiated Nuclear Fuel, plutonium, and high-level radioactive waste on board ships, is a mandatory code developed and maintained by the IMO. The ships are categorized into three classes based on the amount of radiation their cargo emits. Class 3 ships, the highest class of ships, are permitted to carry limitless amounts of radioactive material. The INF code provides standards for damage stability, fire protection, radiological protection equipment, and so on. Since there is no upper class in Class 3, these FNPPs are only obliged to conform to Class 3 standards, which is very lacking for a nuclear reactor on sea. So what we propose is proposing the INF code, amending the INF code. We would like to establish a new class, Class 4, which will be adequate for the standards that will be able to keep these FNPPs safe. Class 4 ships would have to meet higher standards than Class 3 ships in certain fields, and these are the certain fields. Regarding damage stability, we notice that there is no requirement for concrete reinforcements for Class 3 INF ships. In accordance to US Nuclear Regulatory Committee, we suggest a 3 to 5 feet or a 1 to 1.5 meter thick concrete reinforcement to be mandatory for Class 4 INF ships. Next, regarding radiological protection equipment, we see that the current standard for the equipment is very lacking, for it mainly delegates responsibility to the relevant government bodies. We propose a new standard in accordance with the standards set by the US Department of Homeland Security, and we suggest a minimum of level B hazmat equipment to be worn at all times when exposed to radioactive environments, and level A equipment to be prepared and ready in case of necessary situations. We notice that there are some fields that are not lacking for Class 4 INF ships, for instance, just like this, management, training, and shipboard emergency plans. Secondly, we would like to establish a convention that is dedicated to the worldwide maintenance and monitoring of the FNPPs, named CONEG, or the Convention for Offshore Nuclear Energy Generation. CONEG is attached in the documents we have submitted, and it is not final nor complete. We believe that a development requires multiple related bodies. Our emphasis is on the absence and need for such convention. Article 3 of the convention will be for the composition and operation of a multilateral alert system of FNPPs worldwide. States will share real-time information about their FNPPs. The information will be composed of core temperatures of these FNPPs, amount of energy generated, weather conditions, or the amount of nuclear waste accumulated, and so on. Also, more importantly, the alert system will serve as an early warning system if an accident at sea, for instance, a nuclear meltdown or leakage, is to occur. This is very, very important since a nuclear accident at sea is very different from a nuclear accident on land, and immediate evacuation of relevant regions is very, very important. Article 6 of the convention will be responsible for approving and licensing these newly built FNPPs. The signatory states, the states which will sign CONEG, will have to acquire approval from its counterparts when deploying a newly built FNPP. So what this would do is that this would ensure a safe and stable deployment of these FNPPs. So hazardous waters or debated waters, whether it be for the versatile meteorological conditions or very bad weather, or political complications like the South China Sea, where there's political conflicts going on, will be free and void of FNPPs, rendering those regions and areas very safe from the threats that FNPPs pose to the environment and also pose to the ocean. So we are not arguing for a complete ban on FNPPs. We acknowledge and admit that FNPPs are coming and that we should be prepared for it. However, what we do argue is that we must know what we are facing, we must know what is coming to us, and most importantly, we must be prepared for it through regulations and committees and through acknowledgement of problems. Nuclear energy itself, as mankind admits, undoubtedly entails risks. There are always risks to nuclear energy generation. And it is our job, mankind's job, to mitigate and manage and try to avoid these risks. This is Oceans3. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ocean3. If you have any questions, please raise your name, please. Yes, from Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. As long as I understand the headline of this presentation material providing specifically the future guidelines for floating nuclear power plant, is it?
Yes.
But this presentation material also providing at the end of these materials some draft amendment to INF code and new establishment of the new convention, you know? So I'm so confused, what is your concrete proposal and intention to develop the guidelines or to develop the new convention? What is your concrete intention?
Thank you for your question. The reason why we have a two-track solution method is we think that because there is an INF code existing, we think that amending the INF code can successfully mitigate the problems related to the physical structure of the ships. So we want to keep the convention as minimal as possible, try to make sure that it does not infringe and it does not touch on too many aspects of the floating nuclear power plants itself. We want to use what we have and we want to make the best out of it.
And also, like we said, FMPPs are a very new concept to us. They're a very new concept to the world, right? Right now, we want guidelines on how to use these FMPPs safely. But at the end of the day, ultimately, we want global infrastructure or regulations that bind entities and nations on how to use these safely for the safety of us and for the safety of the sea.
Okay, thank you for your answer. But okay, next question is relating to the legal perspective on what you proposed. Do you know what is the difference between the IMO guidelines and IMO mandatory convention? What's the difference, you know?
Yes, so guidelines are not necessarily binding to these member nations. However, once a nation signs a contract, signs a convention, and once they become a signatory, they are binded under international law to keep that convention and to maintain that convention, and more importantly, to sign it into their national laws. So they will face prosecution and they will face punishment if they do not abide by those conventions.
Okay,
So-
it's clear.
Very good. Next question. Yes, from Judge.
It's a very interesting presentation. And what will you say if IAEA requires to deal with these matters in their territory? If they are requiring this, they are saying that this is a power plant, nuclear power plant instead of a ship. So this is very, very important. If that is a ship, and many of the technology perspective topics could be managed in the territory of IMO. I think we can have it, but if that is not the case, I think we could not have chance to deal with in the IMO territory.
So thank you for your question. We'll be looking at that question in two perspectives. The first one will be on the contamination radius and the contamination environment of an accident. So for instance, if a nuclear reactor on land is to suffer a meltdown or explode, the main victims of the meltdown would be the ground and would be the territorial regions. However, if a floating nuclear power plant is to experience a meltdown, the main victim will be the ocean. This is why we think IMO has prior jurisdiction over this issue. And another perspective is that since these FMPPs do not stay in one region, but rather they travel like 4,000 kilometers, like the Russian model does, we believe that it classifies as a ship, and thus IMO has jurisdiction over these FMPPs than the IAEA.
And also, we'd like to point out that the IAEA and also the IMO have precedence of working together. For instance, Chapter 8 of SOLAS is about nuclear ships. We do know that the IAEA and IMO have a history of collaborating. And when the issue is about floating nuclear power plants, a subject that has feet in both realms, we think that the IAEA and the IMO both have more than the motivation or the reason to collaborate.
I think your answer is still focused on the result of the accident. But we need to also consider our technical resource to deal with this problem or this topic as far as I know, I think there is a lack of technical resources in IMO to deal with this kind of very specific technical issues. So I think in case of the IAEA's position, I think they will persist to deal with this topic as the nuclear energy, nuclear power plant perspective. So I think we need to have very strong rationale to persuade them. Should be deal with under the coordination or under the leadership of IMO. So I still cannot see the compelling need to deal with this topic in IMO. Would you tell something more compelling need and or possibility or chance to do that at IMO?
Sorry, thank for the good question, but I think it's a little bit too far. So maybe let's move to the next question because it can be a little bit too difficult for them to reply. So, Polar Voyager, please.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. First of all, we would like to express our sincere gratitude for your sensitive proposals. However, we concerns about the possibility to apply your proposal in real, because in these times, most part of issues of maritime safety and marine environment, and also there are lots of regulation for protect marine environment, such as sulfur cap, and we got some inquiry for possibility for your proposals in real. Thank you.
No, you're saying that you're concerned about the environmental effect of FNPPs, right?
This delegation means that even the advanced country like Europe or US are forcing to use LSFO on their oceans. So in this logic, is it really possible for using the floating nuclear power plants? Will be the number of the floating nuclear power plants will be increased?
Yes, like I explained in my part, the reason why more and more people are using FNPPs is because it shifts the risk of nuclear accidents or incidents away from human beings, right? Because if you think about it, if the nuclear power plant is on the land where people live, an explosion or a leakage or another accident might detrimentally affect a lot of people very deeply, right? But when you put it at the sea, even though in a human perspective, even if it affects the sea, it still doesn't hurt the people directly. So people as humans who are risk aversive, we still have the motivation to push that risk of using nuclear power away from us. So that's why we think that FNPPs are a real potential use, yeah.
As you mentioned, the installation of floating nuclear power plants will be less harmful people because it is located away from the land. However, oceans have the waves and the winds. It will be more, so this delegation expected it will be more effective, bad influence to, it will be spread to around the world, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. We mostly agree with your idea. The reason why FNPPs are on its way is because the level of damage is more indirect, so it does not directly kill people. However, as you have mentioned, and as we have mentioned, the long-term damages and the long-term possible harms to human beings is, we believe, that the FNPPs do have as much risk as land-based nuclear power plants, and that is why we propose such solutions for mitigating those risks.
Okay, yeah, you can give the answer during the break time more, yeah? So I think time is up, so we will stop questions. So well done, and you can return to your seat.